just going to share a story. Since we're partly analyzing Christianity here, I'll share a story from the Bible. And since we're talking about the ethics of killing my son, let's go through the story of God commanding Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Atheists already love going to this story. They say, look at how wicked God is, ordering Abraham to kill his own son. Which is ironic considering the messages they send me telling me I'm wicked for not killing my own son. So let's go through the story of Abraham and Isaac, but let's do something that our atheist friends almost never do. Let's try to understand it. Here goes. In the ancient world, your love for your God was measured by the value of the sacrifice you brought to the altar. The greater the value of your sacrifice, the greater your devotion to your God. Hence, in the land of Canaan, followers of the god Moloch believed that a man's ultimate act of piety was sacrificing his own child to Moloch. Priests would heat up a bronze statue of the pagan god until it was glowing. The devout would place their children into its fiery arms, and the children would burn. Then came Abraham. One of the most famous stories in the Old Testament, indeed one of the most famous stories in the world, is the story of God commanding Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham was so faithful to God that he was ready to obey God's command to sacrifice what was, to Abraham, the most precious thing in the world, his son Isaac. He loved God so much that he tied up his son, put him on a pile of wood, and was about to plunge a knife into him. Critics of the Bible look at this and say, God told Abraham to sacrifice his own son, and Abraham was going to obey him? How barbaric! What an evil book! The God of the Bible is a monster, and so is Abraham for obeying him. But as usual, the critics completely miss the point. And they're not simply missing some insignificant random point here, they're missing what may be the most amazing, life-changing, mind-blowing point that's ever been made in the history of forever. And I challenge every last one of you, Christian, atheist, Muslim, Jew, Hindu, whatever you may be, I challenge you to read through this with me until you get the point, and then find any story by anyone ever that's this deep, this profound, this powerful, this epic. Challenge accepted? Good. Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Abraham, of course, had another son, Ishmael, but Ishmael had been cast out in Genesis 21, leaving Abraham with Isaac as his only son and as his heir. God tells Abraham to take Isaac to the region of Moriah, which is the region of Jerusalem. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. Notice that Isaac had to carry the wood on which he was to be sacrificed, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham obviously hadn't told anyone what he was about to do. Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. Interesting. Abraham, the prophet, says that God himself will provide a lamb for the burnt offering. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Who told Abraham to stop the sacrifice? The angel of the Lord. There are lots of angels in the Bible. The word angel simply means messenger. But this particular messenger, called the angel of the Lord here, is no ordinary angel. He's a messenger who speaks for God, but who is also identified as God. Even here in Genesis 22, the angel of the Lord speaks as God. He says, "You have not withheld from me your son." So according to the angel of the Lord, Abraham was offering a sacrifice to him, to the angel of the Lord. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." Abraham told Isaac that God himself would provide a lamb for the sacrifice. But God provided a ram. Where's the lamb? What about the lamb? Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." Where were they? The region of Moriah. Mount Moriah, just so you know, is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. As we read in 2 Chronicles 3, "Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David." So there's a specific mountain, Mount Moriah, and there's the region of Moriah. Abraham was somewhere in the area of Jerusalem. God showed him a specific place. God provided his own sacrifice. And for many centuries, Abraham's descendants would say, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." The angel of the Lord declares, "I swear by myself, I will surely bless you. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." That is quite the promise. Thousands of years before any of us had ever heard about any of this, the angel of the Lord told some completely unknown guy who lived in the middle of nowhere that all nations on earth would be blessed through his offspring. But Abraham was ready to sacrifice his offspring, his son Isaac, when God told him to. Keep in mind, Isaac was no ordinary son. He was the son of promise. Years earlier, Abraham had complained that even though God had blessed him abundantly, God hadn't blessed him with a son to be his heir. Abraham knew that it was already too late, because he and his wife were way past their prime, to put it mildly. But God told him in Genesis 15 that he would indeed have a son, and that his descendants would be like the stars in the sky. By the way, this passage is where we see what made Abraham unique among his contemporaries. Abraham wasn't unique because he was willing to sacrifice his son. There were pagans who were willing to do that. Abraham was unique because God kept making promises to him that sounded increasingly unbelievable, but Abraham kept believing that God was going to do what he promised. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness. In Genesis 17, God told him that the son of promise would be born to Sarah, who would be the mother of nations. God would establish an everlasting covenant through Isaac. So, when God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son, this was a very special son. This son was prophesied. This son would have a miraculous birth. The everlasting covenant would come through this son. And then God said, "Remember all that stuff I said about your son? Remember all the promises I made about him? You know how all of your hopes and dreams are riding on this one particular son? Now I want you to sacrifice him as a burnt offering. Abraham's God suddenly started sounding just like the gods of the pagans. Sacrifice your child to me. We look at this as people in the 21st century. We look at this as people who came long after the complete reversal of paganism that was about to take place. But try to think about this from the perspective of the people around Abraham. Abraham was surrounded by people who were convinced that the greatest thing they could ever do was sacrifice their children to their God. Abraham was ready to do it, but the angel of the Lord told him to stop. The takeaway message of the story of Abraham and Isaac for the surrounding culture was this: Abraham is just as devout as the most devout of any of you. He's the sort of person who's willing to do whatever his God commands. He loves his God so much that he's ready to sacrifice what he values most in this world. The difference between you and Abraham is not that Abraham is willing to sacrifice his son. Some of you are willing to do that too. The difference between you and Abraham is that Abraham's God doesn't want him to sacrifice his son. Abraham's God stops him from sacrificing his son. Abraham's God provides his own sacrifice. So, putting all of this together, God, who's no ordinary God, orders his prophet, who's no ordinary prophet, to sacrifice his son, who's no ordinary son, but the sacrifice is stopped by an angel who's no ordinary angel. End of story, right? Wrong. The story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this story isn't finished because there was something about a lamb and an everlasting covenant and all nations being blessed through Abraham's offspring. You didn't forget about that, did you? Not going too fast for you, am I, atheists?